Round two is about to begin. So everybody, good afternoon. I hope everybody's refreshed a little. Students have hung new work for us to look at. This is the afternoon session of Master of Architecture thesis reviews here at the University of Maryland. I'm Brian Kelly, your host for this afternoon. And this afternoon, joining us in the critic pool, in first position here is Chris Elcock, who's a principal at GWWO Architects. Behind him is David Gloucester, the education director at the Royal Institute of British Architects. And then sitting here is Cecily Bedwell, who is a principal with the Design Collective in Baltimore and an alum of the program. And then we have Brenda Sanchez, who is the senior architect and design manager for the Smithsonian Institution. Wow, and an alum. And then we have sitting next to her, Mary Rose Rankin, who is a principal at Perkins Eastman Architects. And then next to her is Michael Marshall of Michael Marshall Design here in Washington, D.C., former Key professor, alumna of the program. And then Will Andalora, who's with us today, is the director of the Office of Facilities Management and Development for the Maryland Department of Health. And so this is the guy that manages all of the stuff you're about to talk about. Don't get nervous. You got it all done. You can teach it. He was in your position not too long. Well, several weeks ago he was here. 30 years ago he was here doing this as an alumnus of the program. And last but not least, the always present at thesis reviews, Antonio Ribello, principal at Grimm & Parker Architects, dear friend and an alumnus of the school. So thank you all very much. Naomi Sachs just joined us. She had a specially catered lunch brought to her in the library. You know, can you imagine eating in the library 20 years ago? We'd all been thrown out, but that's different today. Anyhow, so what we're going to do is we have four projects to see this afternoon. This project is kind of bridge between what we saw this morning and what we're going to look at this afternoon. This project deals with dwelling, but it also deals with wellness and acceptance of special needs people in a very special communal environment. And our presenter is Madison LaQuey. Her chair of her thesis committee was Professor Emeritus Ralph Bennett. And joining Professor Bennett was Professor Michelle Lemprakos. And of course, the ringer for all of these things, moi. It's all yours. You need to use the microphone when you talk, and you need to put it up to your face so that we can hear you and the folks at home. This is being recorded today, so anything you say, you might want to gauge it against the public realm. We're on YouTube and Facebook, and I should have said that this morning, shouldn't I? No, I did say that. So anyhow, there you go. Past the rotating knives, the last 7 meters of the corridor are heavily soundproofed. Take it over.
Okay. Oh, sorry. That was really loud. I'm Madison, and this is Beyond Labels, Building Integrated Communities for Cognitive Accessibility. And the question is, how can architectural design and urban planning enhance social inclusion and community involvement for adults with intellectual and or developmental disorders or disabilities, sorry, also known as IDD? Intellectual and developmental disabilities is an umbrella term for a group of chronic conditions that can affect a person's mental health or physical development. Over 8 million people in the United States have an intellectual disability, and 30% of those individuals are Black, brown, or low income. 75% of those individuals are supported by family members, and 1 in 3 adults with IDD live with a family member over the age of 60, and most will outlive their caregiver. People with IDD are also more at risk for social isolation. Looking at the housing for this group of individuals, they face significant challenges in finding suitable housing. These challenges include finding affordable and accessible housing. There's long waiting lists as well for these housing, and the financial and emotional burden for family members. Here's some infographics about kind of the breakdown of how these individuals are housed. Going back 50, 60, even longer than that, these individuals were placed into institutions, and we find that now community homes are actually more beneficial for this group of people. A myth is if you live in a state-supported living center, people have to live in a state-supported living center, but really 8 times as many people live in a community-based service. So kind of looking over the abstract is creating a tailored community for individuals with intellectual disabilities and kind of integrating space where people from the surrounding areas can both live and enjoy space with these people. It has flexible housing for diverse needs. It would promote independence with a focus on safety and shared spaces that promote community. So these are kind of my 3 big things I kept in mind: community, housing, and inclusion. Got some history of history of mental care. Just some 2 plans from 1791 in the late 1800s, and kind of this is the institutions that these people would live in. Very isolated, very not integrated into any kind of community, and this is where we thought people would be able to heal. Moving on to my site, I am doing my project on Springfield Hospital Center in Sykesville, Maryland. It is the 2nd mental hospital in the state of Maryland. There's a little map if you don't know where Sykesville is. Looking at the overall satellite image of it, it's very spread out. There's not much planning that went into this hospital. Kind of wherever they wanted to put buildings, they haphazardly put it. Here's some more plans. And then this is just another aerial view from the 50s showing that these buildings did not really have any rhyme or reason to why they put them there. This was very common in these kinds of hospitals, was they advertised to families that this was the model for health, and they would use images of dining rooms and nice houses to kind of persuade these families to be like, this is where you should send your loved ones, when in reality, it wasn't always that nice. Here's some images of Springfield in its heyday of both the dining room and the day room at the women's facility. Going to Springfield, this is kind of a site map of what the different uses of the buildings. A lot of them are vacant, and there is a few buildings that are still being used, and then half of the site is being used by the police department. They also have added on the south side of the site the Warfield complex, which is housing or townhomes that is across from the women's facility. My big thing was creating these nodes where individuals and housing and common spaces in the community and then the surrounding community can all have this intertwined relationship. And doing that, I went to north of the Springfield site to the Patterson House and decided that this would be the perfect place to kind of create this radial sense of community. The object was to connect it to the existing housing that was even across Route 32. So this is my proposed overall site plan, kind of connecting Springfield to across the street, across 32 to that community, and kind of using the already existing curves of the buildings to kind of create this radial plan. And here's just a zoomed in plan of it. And then going into the housing typologies, this was the big thing, was I wanted to have multiple housing typologies to kind of accommodate different needs. So the townhome typology has two different townhomes, with the first townhome having a studio apartment that could be used to rent out, or for maybe a elderly child could live there, or and then that would be that elevation, and then some perspectives. And then we have the second townhome, and yeah. And then there's some perspectives, and I'm going to talk on the board because I feel like I'm just looking at the thing. Okay, sorry. Okay, so basically the plan, I have this huge site section or perspective, and I wanted to show that there's this community and this separation, not this separation, this connection between all of them. And my goodness, I don't know where. Mhm. I know, I'm getting worked up. Okay, following the site plan, we have, it's kind of like this pattern where it's townhome, community building, townhome, Patterson building. And within the two community buildings, which was kind of the big part of this, was these courtyard buildings, which basically created a courtyard building split in half and had this green pathway in between. And within these, this acts as like pretty much a big home. You have, each person would have their own bedroom per se, and then they would walk outside into the main room for their living and kitchen, and they would have an on-staff apartment as well. There's two different kinds of courtyard buildings. That would be the first one, and the second one would have multi-use space, which could house a cafe or a small restaurant, and would also still have the outdoor entrance to the bedrooms, and then the living room and kitchen space. The courtyard buildings are only 2-story to kind of keep with the human scale and not have these huge, massive apartment buildings that just kind of overbear it. And I wanted it to really feel like a home. Each apartment has its own front lawn per se, with a fenced in area, and kind of creates an individualized entry space for each building. I think I'm ready for questions. For the courtyard building, I actually looked at, it was, oh my goodness, it's in California. I cannot think of the name, but they did something similar where they did like these courtyard buildings, and it was an infill project, and they had like these community buildings, and it kind of created like this space. So I took that idea and I scaled it up huge. And I was like, let's make that, because that was more, they didn't have individual like bedrooms per se. It was just kind of like this common space they had with some bedrooms. And like using this courtyard building and being able to kind of create this home, like was my whole idea.
Do they all have cars?
No, they can though. If they are capable of driving, yes. Have street parking. The townhomes have garages, but the courtyard buildings do not. Yes. 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 So my site, this is kind of the building use map. My site is here, and it's surrounded by a lot of very, probably close to 200-year-old brick historic buildings, which they're beautiful and also falling down. But so it's basically from this, you kind of can see the views of these other, these decaying buildings. But I don't know. I'm gonna go over here. So this is 32. And so the idea was to create, like, I don't know what this community is called, but I was trying to connect that into, and then down here is the newer community where the Warfield complex is.
Hold on. Oh, it doesn't matter. You can't project on something.
So I grew up not too far from, so I'm very familiar with the Springfield site. They have had multiple developers try and come up with scenarios, so I'm glad to see there's a next gen who is also, looking at these sites that have infrastructure, have historic buildings, and thinking about ways to reuse the sites. I also had the question was wondering about cars, and the mobility of some of the persons who might utilize these residences. 32 is an extremely high traffic, high speed road.
Mhm.
I consider myself a good driver, and I still feel like I'm taking my life in my hands sometimes when I drive up that way. Knowing that Sykesville and Eldersburg and some of the, say, larger areas with grocery stores, Walmarts are at least maybe 10-minute drive or so from this area, I was interested on how food service or supplies and other basic needs would be accommodated either in the community, or if the idea was that family, friends, other services would provide transportation to and from.
Yeah, so the idea was to have that it wouldn't just be people with developmental disabilities. It's meant to be a group of mixed individuals. Young singles could live here as well that maybe have low income, and to create this integrated community where you have like you're a foster family pretty much to these people. So the idea would be that a good portion of these people would drive. I know personally, like my cousin has intellectual disabilities and he also drives. So it is possible that these individuals would drive and be able to go north to the Walmart up 32. I think also what I would really love for this would be, this is just the first phase of it. And maybe the second phase might have a small town center or where a small grocer or some smaller restaurants would be able to be there.
I was glad to hear you say that the community was going to include individuals from, that may have intellectual or developmental disabilities and, just regular old, folks, kids or maybe people who are retired living. One of the things that that is really important is to develop this type of community housing that's supportive, right? It's working to provide independence to individuals, but also support as needed, right?
Yeah.
And having these communities not be insular or isolated is also key. So the proximity of this to Sykesville and further north up to Eldersburg makes me think, like, is there any thought about transportation? Is this a node for transportation? Is there busing that could occur? Because there could be opportunities for people living in this community to work in either one of those towns, which are really very close.
Yeah, I know. The original Springfield Hospital actually does have bus stops. There's like one like right here. So implementing more bus stops within the space would also be really beneficial to get the people into Eldersburg that aren't able to drive. But yeah.
We'll get to you next. Yeah.
Hi there. I was wondering, why didn't you incorporate the existing campus and the existing buildings to a greater extent in your design, and instead you prefer to create a new area hugging the a very busy highway?
Yeah. I explored all over the site. We started, in front of the McKeldin building, and that was problematic. We went up north over by the soccer field, and we found that as me and my committee that being north near in close proximity to 32 was best to connect this community to the community across 32. And that was kind of the idea, was to create this access point of, we're not secluding Springfield and hiding them away. We want them to grow out into the other parts of Sykesville and Eldersburg. And so that was the idea of why it would be on the north part, even though 32 can be hectic. I think it would create just a nice pathway, and then, later on, say there would be multiple phases, something could happen down here on the east side.
Actually connecting, how they are actually connecting.
Well, so the original road just went like to the Patterson house and over here. So I connected, I can't reach it. That road, I just made a straight axis and follow this curve all the way through. So I
So
mean,
it is more of a vehicular connection
Yes.
and not a pedestrian connection?
oh, as much as I would love for it to be oh, thank you. I feel like as much as I would love for it to be a pedestrian access point too, I think knowing that 32 is it's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. But creating maybe this the vehicular might be one step closer to creating that connection.
Okay, thanks.
We did discuss the stigma of putting this community in too close a proximity
Yeah.
to the existing buildings and trying to integrate these more with the surrounding community. A lot of
No, that's fine. And you actually answered some of it. My question was, how did that relate to the community? Because you're trying to create a community, but it seems to me that it is a community in itself that is really not related to anything. And you have a big road that goes across and some buildings across. Sorry. Okay. How it relates to the buildings that are across. They are scattered buildings. I have no idea what they are. And is there any relationship? It seems to be like one of these developments where everything is enclosed and they just live by themselves, isolated.
Mhm.
So how do you anticipate the relationship between those two go?
That's a great question. I feel like my idea is not complete. For it to really be integrated and to have this, for my idea to really be, met, it needs to be bigger. It needs to really connect into Eldersburg and Sykesville. It needs to connect back. But with time,
and you also need to talk deeply. You're in competition against nature at the
Okay.
moment. And by the way, for those of you alumni that are worried, these are relatively new skylights, so you're not going to get wet. The old ones, you would be guaranteed you'd be taking a shower now. Go ahead, pal.
oh,
Talk right into it, straight in.
okay. I lost my train of thought.
We're talking about extending, integrating.
Oh, yeah. Still blank. Oh, yeah. Oh, these are some housing. This is a gas station. This is a tire shop or something. So really, there's not much connection here, like in relationship to it. But the idea would be to connect it to, there's a housing development here, and it's huge. This is like the beginning part of it, and then it goes all the way up to 26 of these intertwining roads. I guess it's a huge neighborhood. And so the idea was to kind of create that connection into this neighborhood more so. But ideally, this plan would go all the way across 32 and maybe go across, not 32, this road, and then continue on the side of 32.
And Madison, point out that you were making a connection to a pre-existing historic house that's
Yeah.
on the site.
So this is the Patterson house. It was the original farmhouse. Springfield was a working farm hospital at one point. Well, it was a farm. It was 1,300 acres, and then it got split up. The state bought it, and it's been split up multiple times since then. But the original, I guess it's the original house. The farmhouse is still there.
So it's an interesting proposition to this notion of integration, right? And you mentioned that there would be, I guess, people who could live here that didn't really have a lot of these problems you've identified. But then is there a difference in the housing types in terms of who would live where and things? Are there things you discovered in terms of what those folks need that might be different than what you might have in the free market that some rat-faced developer might build?
Yeah. So the townhomes is supposed to be more accommodating
They're all friends of
for
mine, too.
everybody, versus like, a young couple with children, or maybe even an elderly couple that want to have to move out to somewhere smaller. That was kind of the idea between the townhouses, to have a housing option for people that might want to live in this area, but they don't necessarily need the accommodations of the community building. Community building is designed to help build this, like this family in itself with these individuals that maybe they don't have family members to help take care of them, or maybe they don't have the financial resources, and they would come here and they can build their own kind of network of friends and family and coexist. And that would be for people with intellectual disabilities, but it could also be maybe the McKeldin building has a rotating nurse staff, and they do a lot of training. So maybe one of the nurses that's working at the McKeldin building might work or live 6 months at a time at this building as well.
I guess the thing that is coursing through my head looking at your project is a couple of different things. One was I was reminded of when I drove Colin Rowe around Kentlands once, and I said, well, what'd you think? He said, not bad. And I said, Kentlands, right? And I said, what do you think the problem is? He said, well, he said that what it really needed was a continuous landscape at its perimeter that separated it from the miasma of suburban crap built around it. Okay, which I thought was a really interesting observation. It's one of these problems we have in America that one community blends into another, and one might be better and one might be worse. And the landscape doesn't serve to make those communities distinct in a way. And I think that, combined with the sort of fragmentary quarter circle form here and the way you talk about it, suggesting that it could go on, right, worries me in that the identity of the community, I think, in terms of how landscape might identify this as a place, might somehow be compromised. And I think integrating with the stuff around it, maybe the road systems have to connect, but I think the value proposition might be served better if, in fact, the landscape served to make it distinct from those places and make it more special. One thing. The second thing that puzzles me a little bit about it is when I think about cognitive accessibility, right? That's something we all undergo, right, at some level, right? In other words, when we walk down the street, we understand a storefront as a separation between inside and outside. We understand front yard fences and sidewalks as the delineation of the public realm from the front yard and the private realm of the house and stuff. And what I'm missing a little bit here is the way in which some of the kind of cues that are cognitive could be used to build better senses of domain and boundary that people could benefit from. So I have a special needs kid, right? And when somebody is on our property that she doesn't know, it sends her into significant anxiety. Our property is extremely well articulated relative to fences and walls and things like that. And I would think that one of the things you would try to do, for example, I'm looking at this courtyard building with the two courtyards facing each other, and the extent to which that is so open to these pathways and stuff, I think is problematic. That I think that there ought to be more of a hierarchy of domain relative to the spaces adjacent to the buildings that allow for the occupants of the building to see very easily where their place starts and ends. And that when someone breaches that enclosure, goes to a fence, then they know it's a problem. When it's ambiguous, like I think a lot of this is, because when I look at the actual renderings and things, when When it's ambiguous, it doesn't, to me, send the right cues about how the scale between the overall landscape and the building is organized to make those kinds of distinctions and build familiarity in a way that makes people feel safe. And I think that's an issue here. You know, and I think the fact that it's a fragment 32, I don't know as well as Mary Rose does, but if it's a busy road, it's a busy road. It could easily have been a park along that sort of made a sense of separation from these other places in ways that gave it a sense of domain that helped people feel like it was home. I remember riding around Las Vegas once on some site we were going to do outside, and I was with a rat-faced developer, and we were going into one of his communities, and he said, here's the front door, here's the I'm home moment. And they spent a lot of money with a fountain and a wall and all that stuff, and it seems trite, you know, but at one level, it does address a kind of cognitive sense of place that I'm looking for here, and that the sort of rather casual way that the community buildings are organized and the way it relates to the existing farmhouse doesn't build that up as a kind of center in a way that I think it could as well. And I've talked too much, but that to me is really the essence of the problem.
Thank you.
Matt, I wonder to what extent the suburban post-war American landscape contributes to that, because things like fences do not exist anymore. If you look towards European culture, the wall, the gate that's at the front yard is separated from, you know, you walk around cities in UK, cities in Italy. Yeah, and then we just let the one front lawn just keep going on and on and on. So, David.
Completely endorse the comments about domain. I think 100% on the money. And I think the conversation actually about this project, if I might make so bold, is about spaces between buildings. And the domain thing is about ownership and orientation and people being able to know that they're home. But I think it's also about how you articulate the whole of this composition in relation to this quadrant. You know, when Englishmen like me see quadrants, they think about Georgian Bath. You know, we're just programmed, we're hardwired into this. Yeah, that's a good quadrant. And I think there's a lot of things I can say about this, but I think the morphology of this needed more work, because one of the dilemmas you've got is the space here between the buildings worth having, okay, in terms of what it's doing for the ecology of the whole site. A place where a child could play, a place where your dog could exercise temporarily. Or should you be thinking about some of these as being a terrace? I mean, I hate to get into building economics, but this is an incredibly expensive way to build. And I don't think there's an environmental, spatial, or formal payoff by having these essentially, they're kind of what the landscape architects call them pinch pockets. They're kind of pinch pockets of space, which are neither landscape nor space that you could move into, unless there's some kind of program about how the houses sort of spill out into those spaces. I don't think that's what it's about. Second thing is that my microphone has died. No, it's died. There we are. Then the second thing I think is about the volume of space, what I'm going to call an almshouse plan. You know, that's what in the UK would recognize that as an almshouse plan, always where you have this kind of C-shaped configuration. And the issue I guess I've got with it is I'm not sure whether this is big enough here to be worthwhile. And then there's another thing about the ambiguity of, are you trying to create a landscape space here, or should it be turned around that way so that this becomes a kind of a compositional centerpiece to the whole thing? Because again, it's quite medieval, this, although you've slightly oddly rendered it in a sort of late postmodern suburban style. I can't quite understand. We won't talk about language. It's unkind sometimes. The thing that interests me, I think it's a great proposition. It's something incredibly valuable, but the quadrants, each individual relationship needs to be more carefully articulated, but also how you finish off the quadrant here and here, I think is absolutely vital. And this guy is kind of falling off the grid somehow, has a relationship with this landscape here, but I'm not quite sure what it is. And then there's another erratic here. It either has to be rigorous, and sometimes I think you're trying to say, okay, that's one piece, and then that's another piece, and then elsewhere it falls off the grid. It's full of geometric contradictions, and you know, when all is said and done, that geometric harmony makes the thing cohere or not cohere. And it goes back to the thing about orientation and domain and sense of ownership. It's the beginnings of a good strategy. But then I also think, well, okay, is this the highway from hell? This is 32, the highway from hell. Okay, but what's this street here? Is this busy too? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, again, I think, well, you like the quadrant so much that you can't bring yourself to say, well, perhaps this goes there, and then you have a really worthwhile landscape in the center of this, which relates to that, and which is sealed off by that. Sorry. You need a series of analyses which look at this as an environmental proposition. If this is a dangerous high-speed road, which even our fine driver here has qualms about negotiating because it's a difficult road, then I think you need to reinforce the safety aspect of that perimeter. Because if there's the odd bit of cognitive dissembling, your first obligation is to the safety of your community. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to go? Okay. So just building off of the comments, site analysis is a big deal. I think realizing how they laid out, I'm betting, I don't know, but the original campus was because it was at the high points or there were vistas, and that's the way the buildings were organized. I don't think that they were haphazardly arranged on the site. People were very sensitive to the arrangement of buildings, whether that was solar orientation or the long view. I know this area is very rolling, so I'm assuming that is the reason, but I think we're missing that too, is what are the drivers? You know, I think it's unfortunate that the main driver of this plan is an offset of the radial condition of a highway. I think it would be much more powerful, and I do see it in your section that the historic house, which I think is all the way over there on the upper right, sits on a high point, right? And that could have informed the form of this plan in a much more meaningful way than an offset, a radial plan because of a highway. I think we're all reacting to that, but I think it's critical when you show us this, that you're also, you do a service to yourself of showing what precedents you studied, because then it gives you an argument for why you did X, Y, and Z. So does the site analysis, right? It gives you a reason to have this. You have all different open spaces, but I didn't hear you describe, other than the central area, what the purpose of those. I'm imagining that's a community garden down there, but I don't know. And so it's a little, I know you have those ideas in your head, but getting them out and diagramming them in a process is really important for us to understand it, and also for all those thoughts to gel and you be able to present it. So one other thing, draw street sections. If you're designing communities, you really need to think through how street sections work, because I see sometimes sidewalks right up against a street and the streets are kind of wide, and then there might be a sliver of green along the one sidewalk. You need, you know, especially with this community, would think that you want a tree planting area, a buffer between the motor vehicles moving and the sidewalks. Also, trees lend shade. So all of those things are important. So just like you do sections through buildings, if you're designing communities, please do sections through streets and really understand the layers of those so all users are comfortable.
Yeah, this area has a lot of topography and you can kind of start to see it in her section up there. But what I recall is you drive up along 32 and you can almost look down into the campus, the way it rolls down in. And so to some of the comments Matt was making, the topography of that area almost starts to create that unique, what could be that self-contained, sort of identity, because you can, as you drive up along, you can look down and see all of this area. 32, it's one of the major connectors to folks that live up in Carroll County, the counties along the northern edge of Maryland and down to DC. And so a lot of that traffic in the morning are folks pouring down to Columbia, to Savage, down to DC to get down to metros. And in the afternoon, it is folks pouring back up. And over even the course of my lifetime, I have watched as it was predominantly farmland. And as those farms have sold off, they have gone in and built housing developments with one road in, one road out. And so all of that traffic, there's no services in there. It's just, it all pours out onto this road, trying to make rights, trying to make lefts, trying to get to work in the morning, trying to get back to pick up the kids in the afternoon. And so it creates this just continual building congestion along 32. And so I liked your comment about, maybe this is a first phase, right? Because wouldn't it be great if this truly could be a self-sufficient community? If there were retail, maybe it's at a ground level of a, multi-story residential building, different scales of typology, different types of buildings. But what if there was retail that could provide income to some of the residents, that could provide and start to eliminate some of the traffic out on 32. And I would love the idea of transit up there that could help connect not just these residents, but a lot of the folks that have continued to move north and north and north because of affordability, a more sustainable and efficient way to move lots of these residences down to Columbia, to DC, and back and forth into other areas. So I think this is, several people said, it's a great initial move, and some more study of the topography and the interstitial, the spaces in between, the spaces in the buildings, how they connect, and some of what else could be on this site could be a really exciting further development.
I'll keep this brief. One thing that this, oh, where'd he go? That gentleman brought up to me was, he has moved, was about wayfinding. And, especially with with this community, maybe there are neighborhoods or, the way that you've rendered the I guess, townhouses, I would get lost. Like I wouldn't know which one is mine. And so, maybe the first row that's parallel to 32 has one style or color or something, that's my neighborhood. And the kind of bubble garden in the middle, like that's really recognizable, that people will say, oh, I am just past the bubble landscape. And then, so what is the next one? And I'm next to the community garden and I'm next to the trails. So that's much more fine-grained than I think you have been able to get with this thesis project, but it would be really important for all of the residents and especially the special needs residents to have that kind of wayfinding and like integrated identifiability.
It's really interesting looking at, you said typical townhouse. Those are actually duplex, right? So it's not a townhouse. But if you had made this like some of the British crescent, I think, and I'm going to ask our British friend, what's the one that's near Regent's Park where there are those terraces? Chester Terrace and, yeah. So Matt's developer friend would tell you that I'm not going to have that space in between. Let's push them more together. You don't really need the windows that you have on the side. So that then you really make this a grouping of townhouses, and it could be just 3 sections. And each one could have a gateway like Chester Terrace, the buildings I'm talking about in London. And the way they sort of work in gardens, you actually have a nice setup where you have a backyard. So the space in between is not really buying you anything, and you don't need the light, the natural light from it. So if you go back and really look at the idea of townhouse and then how you can give identity to each of those sections, that would just, I think it might seem a little more urban, but with that grove of trees that you have along, that's 32, it gives you the separation and then set up a different scenario for what you've done. And the fact that you've even made it sort of a crescent shape, you're almost there. So that's what I think. It's like you looked at, okay, I have to make these look like single family homes, even this, and although they're duplex. I think you got caught up in what else is going on around there where you can come up with, I'm going to call it a new, it's not new typology because they have it and people are doing it here truly with townhouses. And, the space that you have in between, it could be that maybe there's a 2-car garage. You sort of make up with that space that's not really getting you anything. So that's what I think.
Quick comment to follow up on what Matt said, which I think is really important about the identity and domain and protected space of each family unit. Adding to that comments you've had about the street sections. I'm really struck by your long section up there. And I just want to emphasize, especially to students who may be listening, how productive it would be to get rid of your plans for a day and just work on that section, plus several smaller street sections, and actually try to figure out how can you articulate fantastic identifiable space within those long sections.
You've bitten off a lot here, and there's a lot of stuff, to do. I do think, though, some things I would want to think about moving forward. I think one of the things I very much appreciate is these outdoor porches on the duplexes that engage the street there, because I think in a community like this, that old saying, which gets used too much, it takes a village to raise a child, right? The extent to which the people who are not challenged with these problems can sit there and see what's going on with the people that are, if they're going for walks out on the street, and be part of the kind of, hey, I just saw your kid doing something, or I just saw this person, that's the sort of familiarity you want to build up, right? Which would make me think that maybe I wouldn't put the garage maybe at the ground floor in the front. I could even see a solution where you might have just driveways between the buildings, and that might be an entry or a separate unit or something like that, because the garages are simply not going to promote a sense of public space. The buildings, unless the car does, maybe someday cars will do that for us, but right now they don't, right? And I might find another way to do that. But I think the extent to which these buildings, the insides of them, do engage the exterior, that's a big plus, because in particular in a community like this, you want to do everything you can with the architecture to build up familiarity between the occupants of the building and the public realm, so that if things are going sideways, because when people of the cohort you're servicing here, when they live in communities like this in numbers, the chances are that there's going to be more incidents, more people who have distress, more people that need help and things like that. So the extent to which the buildings support that kind of just quiet, simple surveillance so people can see what's going on is good. So my way of thinking, I think I would not make a community comprised just of those people. I think what I would do is find a way to have specific buildings that are perhaps geared towards them, but make it a normal community that they can live in and get to know their neighbors. Because from my own experience, that's a very positive thing.
Yeah, I think that just thinking about the process here, and I'm going to pass this over to Ralph to conclude in a moment. So an architecture of good intentions can often have unintended outcomes. And I think that a lot of what we've talked about here are, we agree with you in that this is a group of people, a group of fellow human beings that need to be treated with respect and dignity and provide opportunity for them. And the idea of integrating this more, from the start, I've thought this should be in a more established urban setting, but it went here to start with. And that it ought to have the opportunity to mainstream as much as possible this cohort of people. We ended up here, and this is where we are. But the selection of this site really demanded an experience with urban design principles in an American landscape that I don't think you had wrestled with very much before. In fact, actually, at a certain point, I brought down Towns and Cities by Liz and Andreas, and we were opening it up, and it was like a revelation. And that had you done this in a couple of different projects, this might have been a breeze to address all of these things. But this was your first time doing that. And once you got a hold of that, you got a hold of a lot of issues, notwithstanding the criticism that's gone on today. Okay, so you understand that. Professor, would you like to take the microphone and make the final remarks for the student?
There have been some excellent comments made about the urban design aspects of this, and much of it has to do with the scale of the project that you chose to solve. But while she worked on the campus for quite a while, adding to one of the buildings that promised an axis along which she could make a slightly more condensed therapeutic environment, she took her model, which she found in her research, this idea of the well providing shelter to the unwell, as a radical therapeutic model, rather than the rest of the hospital, which consists of individual pavilions isolated one from the other, emphasizing the separation among the residents, the patients, which seems not to be an appropriate thing to do. So I commend you for taking that model and trying to make it work. But some of the other observations, I think, might have to do with the scale you chose to work at and so on. But there is a real suggestion here about therapy for mental illness that I hope we've learned from.
So thank you so very much. And as the song says, go west, face the west. Go west, it is peaceful there, go west. Well, you don't listen to the, you don't really listen to the right kind of music. That's the problem. Hey, good job. Get some sleep. Have your parents drive you home. Please do not drive. Do not drive. Promise me? Okay. Okay. Good to see you.
I sent you something for her.
I saw that.
Okay.
Yeah. You did a great job. I was just gonna say at the end of the last project, the well and the unwell, as Ralph Bennett characterized the situation. But it strikes me as that, you know, it's a spectrum, and at any given point in time, we all might be well and we all might be unwell too. So, you know, it's a very important thing to understand, particularly with design for special accommodations, that you may be designing for yourself in many of these things. Not to say, okay, we're just about there. Speaking of the unwell and the well, we're moving to a college campus out in California. So even though I did my rendition of the Pet Boys Go West a moment ago, and none of you really heard it, Pet Shop Boys, we're going to think about sunny California. And I left my cheat sheet over here. Get my glasses on as well. And Brianna has a project for us that started as a library devoted to wellness. And then as she analyzed the site, she quickly became aware of the potential to hybridize. And so basically this came to embrace the idea of healthy student living at the library. So Brianna is the student that's going to be presenting. Professor Simon was the chair of this committee, along with Tanya Bonsall and myself. And just for reference, this is a dual degree student. She's getting a degree, Master of Architecture and a Master of Real Estate Development. And did you already do your defense for real estate?
Saturday.
Saturday? So she's going to have pro forma for this building and everything by Saturday. And so anything you can say to help her, you know, knock the ball out of the park with the, what did Professor Bell call them? The rat face? I'm not going to say it. No. Brianna, break a leg.
Thank you. All right. So I feel like we've all heard the hyperbole that students spend so much time in the library, they practically live there. This is a realization of what if that could be true. So hello everyone, I'm Brianna, and this is, gotcha. This is the Nexus, which is a combination typology building with a heavy focus on well-being. So the goal of this thesis is to re-envision the campus library for the 21st century. Looking at library typologies over time, there's been this shift from having a library simply be a repository for books, shifting into what is now more technology focused and a collaboration space. So what would be the library of the future? The next step, a natural next step, would be focusing on wellness as well. So two guiding questions that I have had for this thesis are, how can the campus library of the future promote student well-being? And being that I'm a dual degree, I'm also interested in how this can be a financially viable solution for the campus. So this project is a response to student mental health crisis. There is such high levels of stress in academia, and this stress comes from areas like coursework, finances, trying to incorporate your social life into all of that. And having such high levels of stress can affect students' mental health, their physical well-being, and can also poorly affect their academic performance. So the first step that I took into trying to figure out how to push the library into the next step would be focusing on program. Of course, we're going to include the typical elements of stack spaces and gathering spaces, but we're also now including areas for wellness and more focused on open space and sort of a prospect and refuge aspect of creating nooks within the library without necessarily dividing it. And then we're also including areas of cafes for students to go. And of course, this is a dual typology, so there is housing on top of this. Looking at the wellness specific program, Here we are including makerspaces and mixed media creation labs for sort of the creativity aspect. We're also incorporating more relaxed spaces, so tranquility gardens, meditation and yoga spaces in the library, and then some socializing and intriguing areas like the cafes, which are located one on each level, and gallery space. The Nexus is situated just south of the campus's art gallery, so any overflow art that they might be trying to display, we could put up in the library. So how are we going to go about making the library focused on wellness? This is talking to our first question through research on neuroarchitecture, which is basically taking neuroscience, architecture, and physiology and psychology, and trying to take principles from each of these areas, combine them into one theory on how to help benefit physical and mental health and well-being. And one of the main principles of this study is biophilic design. This is the inherent human urge to connect with nature. So how can we bring that into a library space? Some of the principles that I've distilled through this research include incorporating natural materials and organic forms into the design, having a balance between, as I mentioned previously, prospect and refuge, and then engaging the senses. I also wanted to bring in as much natural lighting as possible into the building, and then incorporating natural views wherever possible. So these are some precedents that I looked into relating to biophilic design and neuroarchitectural principles. They range in size from a small community library all the way up to the Jewel Airport. And a lot of these buildings are also LEED certified, which is important to the development as well, which I'll be talking about in just a moment. So looking at our site location, this project takes place in California, in Long Beach. Near the coast, there is California State University Long Beach, or CSULB. So this campus has a parking lot dead center right now. It's about 70,000 square feet, and it's underutilized, as I would say. But there are currently 3 housing developments in association with the university, and this is important to note because the university has a 2035 master plan where they are trying to, one, increase resident housing on campus and slightly decrease their commuter population. Currently 90% of the student body is commuting to this campus. So the site also has access to a lot of off-campus amenities. There's an airport only 15 minutes away, and there are also a lot of natural spaces, Seal Beach and 2 recreational parks very near to the site. And the area has great accessibility. And this is important because, as I mentioned, we have a parking lot that we are now removing the spaces for the employees. Typically, this site is zoned for any new development would require new parking spaces. However, it also falls under an AB 2092 zone, which means that there's no minimum parking requirement. However, we still wanted to take into account that we are removing these spaces. So the master plan has ideas in place to put a new parking lot elsewhere on campus. So the campus is organized into these districts, as you can see over here. We're focusing on that central district. And here in this color-coded map, you can sort of see how the buildings typologies are associated. All of these green buildings are known as student hubs. So they're all near that central district that the university is trying to create, having this nexus of connection throughout the campus. And here is the site right in the center of all of that. So why include housing in this? Housing, again, as I mentioned, the campus in general is trying to increase their housing on campus, but being that biophilic design is not necessarily a money bringer, or library typologies in general are not huge revenue generators, I wanted to make sure that this project would be profitable for the university. This is speaking to that second question of how to make this realistic and financially viable. So, as I mentioned, biophilic design is not known for its profitability, but it does have some associations with future impact that can improve the finances of a project. Looking at the library, the housing, and potential retail options, including spaces that benefit the viewer and their wellness, it makes people encouraged to come back and engage with the spaces more. And it can also, as I mentioned, improve performance or stress reduction in students, which helps their academic performance and looks great for the university. So some of the university goals, CSOLB is very focused on sustainability, and they also have LEED goals throughout the campus. So a lot of their new buildings, most of their new buildings are trying to come out as LEED Platinum. So as I mentioned earlier with the precedents, with this will be focused on creating a building that is sustainable as well. And then here you can also see the campus has this idea of a main gateway through the campus, which terminates directly on our site. That makes this the perfect area to have this grand gesture of student engagement. This is the site specifically, looking at that parking lot. We're right next to the admin building, which is to the left on this map, and we're surrounded by potential green connections as well. There's also this pedestrian bridge that goes over the road leading onto the parking lot, and that pedestrian bridge is part of that gateway path that I just referenced. Looking at the site from a couple different angles, there's also only one area of topography really on the site because it's a parking lot, it's been graded, it has very great drainage, and it's also very flat. Other than this one corner here where it rises pretty rapidly to meet a plaza, which is about at the second level of what the building will be. So as I mentioned prior, this area is perfect in terms of creating a culminating point for the campus circulation. Here you can see an axial diagram compared to the campus master plan's analysis of circulation on the site, and you can see there's heavy, heavy pedestrian movement across this area. This is also a, as I've mentioned multiple times, wellness-focused design, and this university has very high opinions on wellness-focused elements. So along that main gateway pathway, they also want to create this into a wellness walk. So the university is trying to create areas that focus on student mental health and give them accessible routes to walk across campus and sort of take a breather. This will be one of the main routes that they're looking at. You can also see in this diagram that they've highlighted that parking lot area as something that they want to see in the future as a central hub. So looking specifically at the site and more into the building design, I pulled many regulating lines across the site itself to try and make the geometries work for what the building is. But you can see in this navyish blue line here, that is the walk across the gateway to campus or wellness walk connecting to the pedestrian bridge. And that will take you down into the center heart of campus, down that tail of the university. So the goal of this design was to create sort of a fault line mimicking California's fault line structures. But it was a way to bring students across the campus from the parking areas into the main functional area of campus, but bring them through this new hub instead of just navigating around a parking lot. Here are multiple massing models to see what different areas would look like in focusing on both sun analysis and potential natural ventilation options as well. And we ended up settling on this chosen massing at the top, having the bars come all the way to the ground rather than levitating the housing. And it also sort of pulls and undulates the facade a bit, so it has a bit more of a natural structure rather than something that's just sheer all the way across. And that brings us to the vision. So this is what you're looking at, the nexus. This is that fault line running through the building. You're standing next to a cafe on the ground floor. And you can see again that spine in the site plan, which is a culmination of enclosed space, but also open to air, creating a large light well through the building. And that is focused on bringing as much lighting into the natural lighting into the building as possible. So looking at the ground floor, you enter to the south of this building, and that will take you to the university's student union. And then, of course, there is that sort of fault line path navigating you to this point over here, which is an indoor courtyard. And then there's also looking at the second entrance from the plaza on the second floor. So most of the space is dedicated to having the perimeter wrapped in the dedicated spaces, and then the main foyer area is all open space, and the sort of nooks are designed by taking the stacks and creating little nodes for students to collect. And then on the third floor, there is the green roof and then the typical residential floor plans. So this is a combination of single dorms, double and triple dorms. The double and triples will be the same square footage. And every floor for the residents will have 2 common areas that include kitchenettes. So that makes these premium units. Here you can see the designs. This is taking the university's beachside village mock-up for what their rooms look like, and then my iteration, which just gives the students a little bit more square footage, which fits a little bit better with the structural plan of this building. So looking into the landscape concepts, the sustainability features that I mentioned earlier that are very important to this project, creating as much natural lighting in the building as possible, and also, of course, having that green roof, and then bringing sort of the outside in with that interior courtyard. I also wanted to include solar panels on the roof of the building. Not only does that help with the sustainability factor, but it also offers real estate tax credits. And then the outdoor uses, the landscaping concepts for this site itself, bringing the students on the site and also into the building. So the green roof has multiple areas for engagement in community building, such as different picnic eating areas or a community student garden. And then there would be, because of the buildup of this outdoor amphitheater, a sheer wall that could be used potentially as an outdoor art gallery or some sort of installation to teach about sustainability. And then having that larger space to the northern end of the site would be just more dedicated, designed out landscaping for student walking around and sort of having that breathing moment. It's also located above a canal that runs underneath the campus, so nothing can really be built on top of that area for main structural purposes. So bringing it all back together, here we have the nexus and those principles that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this presentation, bringing them back into play of making sure we're hitting those biophilic and neuroarchitectural ideas. So incorporating natural materials and organic forms, trying to bring that in the form of the stacks shaping the area rather than having actual built rooms taking up all of the space. Balancing prospect and refuge of being able to feel like you're in a cozy nook, but also being able to look into that massive courtyard or open light well, and then engaging the senses, being able to be inside and outside potentially at the same time, bringing in natural lighting. I feel like I've mentioned that enough. And then incorporating natural views. The student dormitories will be looking either into the green roof so they can see that courtyard and green roof, or they'll be looking outwards towards the campus. And as we saw earlier, the site itself is surrounded by some green amenities. These are just a few precedents for some of the aesthetic features that we were looking into. And then, thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Hi, that was a very professional presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I got the feeling that students and other people who are on campus could walk right through the 2 library buildings, sort of to get from point A to point B. But now I don't think that's the case after you've.
So this is mostly focused on the student body on campus. So basically the goal would be that if you enter on the ground floor, you're entering at the level of the University Student Union. And then you could travel up these main staircases on either side of that open courtyard and exit onto the plaza level, which is an administrative building, but is mostly the direct path to get to the main parking lots on campus.
Okay. Yeah, I really like libraries. I have an interest in them professionally, so I was very excited to see this project. And one thing that struck me in your renderings, you have the stacks. I think there will be those, you know, it is a library, but there are also going to be a lot more computers and just like big rooms full of students using computers for various things. And I was glad to see that you had, you know, the maker spaces and all of that other. I wish that that central lower courtyard were larger. It's pretty small. It would probably fit maybe 10 people comfortably. And if you think about like a central gathering, outdoor gathering space where people might be able to spill out of the library and have an outdoor class or study, it's really not large enough to do a whole lot with. So, you know, I do landscape architecture, so move some of the building back and and create more outdoor space. I appreciate that there's more outdoor space on the outside, but that was the main thing that struck me.
Yeah, I wanted to create sort of a combination of actually being outside and then just having the visual of looking outside, which is where that sort of light well spine comes into play, but I agree it could be larger.
Well, I'm just going to say that I'm really impressed with your presentation and with your critical thinking about the location of your project, the Nexus. I love the guiding principles that are tying to the biophilic principles. I think all those things are great. I also have an interest in libraries professionally, so I can speak about that for a while, but I'm not going to really focus on that much, but I'm just going to ask a couple questions. You mentioned that this was a parking lot before. You also mentioned people commute to this campus, and nobody likes parking lots, but at the same time, we do need them. And I am wondering, did you just ignore that fact, or are you proposing that the students are going to live here, so there's no need for cars? Is that the theory behind
So
that?
it's a couple things in combination. So for one, the students that are in this building, of course, living there, so they don't need the transportation. They're already on campus. However, it's also the university itself in their 2035 master plan. They're trying to move to less vehicular traffic on campus. And so in doing that, they're reducing parking overall as a goal
Understood.
for the campus. And because they have such great connection to public transportation, that's where that zoning amendment that I mentioned earlier comes into play, which is basically, it's based on the fact that they're so close to a massive transportation hub. So the students have a lot of options beyond vehicular traffic.
Okay.
They're also trying to incorporate they're adjusting the schedules of different high priority classes so that there's less students on the campus at the same time. So
I find it very interesting, this idea of co-locating student housing with a library. I've worked in many co-located projects in my life with libraries, and housing is one of the most difficult things to actually achieve with mostly because of the separate schedules and budgets and things that actually happen in real life that don't normally make those two happen at the same time. But I can see in this project being possible because it's all one entity. It's the university would be developing this. So that I do commend you on that. I think it's really clever. In terms of the actual form, I do find that there's a lot still to be done. The building seems pretty raw in terms of your concept, I think it's pretty solid. I do think there is a proportion of that courtyard versus the height that I'm a little unsettled by, that, because it looks a little bit canyon-like to me. And I wonder, the number of stories that you got here, is it because of a pro forma that you actually did, or to get a certain number of beds into this dorm, or what led you? Because to me, you could lop off of 2-3 stories and you have a better courtyard relationship.
So
onto this.
it definitely was a little bit related to the performa.
Yeah.
This project, in theory, would yield a very high return for the university. After 5 years, the expenses would be paid off and the university would be solely gaining profit from the site. So that sort of came into play. It also, the height is sort of an indicator of this centralized node on campus, sort of a beacon, if you will, so students can see it from everywhere on campus. So we were trying to get a little bit more height for that reason.
I get it, but balancing, economic forces and biophilia, sometimes, which one wins? And finally, one last thing, the libraries normally tend to like to have one point of entry. Some do have 2 points, but it becomes really onerous on the staff and on the management of these. So you're saying that the bottom here is mainly a student union, the actual library is on the upper level?
No, so the student union building is located south of this
I see.
development. This is
So
all
this, the
library.
entire thing is a library
Yes.
behind there. So that would be challenging if you would be developing that. I think there would be a few things we would have to change, but otherwise, terrific project. I could think of many things. I'm going to let others speak. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's here, then here, and then there.
I have a couple of questions for you. One of them actually echoes what Antonio was saying, but I was approaching it from a different point of view. And it's the fact that if you look at the orientation where north is, you're not going to get that much light in those spaces. And you're talking about sustainability and bringing light into the spaces, and there will be none. So maybe by pushing out the buildings out, you have space on the north there, you create a larger space with more access to light. So that was one of my comments. And the other question was about the amphitheater that you have at the bottom. You haven't mentioned it, so I do not know what that is, or because it just seems to be, an amphitheater, and then what?
So the amphitheater is built into the only sheer topography on the site. So the topography goes from being at that ground level and rises up very rapidly to meet the plaza space. So this was sort of an idea of making another connection on the exterior from the plaza to the ground level and having students be able to sort of funnel their way into that outdoor amenity. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure if that answered the question. Oh, so it would be in replacing like an auditorium space in the library. So for any like class forums or lectures being held, they could host it in that area or having sort of gathering space.
One of the things that was intriguing to me when you were working through all the analysis and presenting your analysis of the site was that this parking lot was in the center of this campus, and this axis of circulation coming down into the center of the campus. One of the things I'm wondering if you considered is when I look at the building and I look at the development of the base of the building, I don't see how this building is maybe projecting a center to the campus. And I wonder if you thought about, what more this building could be rather than having it be something that you flow through the center of. Is it something that also opens, more toward the street and engages the campus to create more of a center and more of a focus? So I don't know if you thought about that, because I feel like there could have been a more of a there at the ground level there.
It is. I found that interesting. The building's height is probably a beacon or a marquee for the university. That alone would attract people to go there.
I toured a campus with my daughter. And the way students move through some of these campuses, they actually go from one side of the building, they move through a building, they wander down,
I do that at Stamp a lot. Just cut through Stamp. Mhm. Yeah.
You don't even need to have, you can have a lot of this stuff.
Brianna, thanks for the presentation. You're very fluent, you're very confident.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good thing, and it is, as they say, a blessing and a curse. I'm not sure you're particularly self-critical. I'm sorry to say. I think you establish a narrative which sounds like a plausible explanation for why you've done what you've done. But if I'm looking at this as a thesis project, as a robust piece of architecture, which is the summation of many years of study, I think we're entitled to a little bit more. What if you were colleague alluded to this issue, which is that you've got quite a lot of space here. You took a parking lot out. Wonderful. What does America need? Less parking. Well, or more parking, actually, because you're a big country and everybody's reliant on the car. Us Brits are eliminating parking. Different approach. But the reality is there's bags of space here. And I'm mystified as to why that is the dimension, because that dimension is actually is about equivalent to 2 study bedrooms. So I'm kind of thinking it's what, 12, 15 meters? What's that dimension? Oh, sorry, I'm metricated. Our quaint European customs. Okay, 45 feet. That's about 12 and a half meters, something like that. 12 and a half meters. I mean, it's okay. Here we are, 45 feet. It's from the end there to there. What's this tree saying? What's he saying? Help! This is not viable. It's not viable. The thing is, you set up the thesis on the basis of biophilic design. No problem with that. Great. Good motivation, good ambition, good aspiration. What's wrong with these spaces?
The residential circulation has no.
Yeah, what's wrong with them in sustainability terms, in terms of resource efficiency? They are artificially lit 24/7. Okay, because there is no relief anywhere along these double-loaded corridors that allows natural light to be admitted. And you stressed repeatedly the value of artificial light, of natural daylight. It's part of a thesis of any resource-efficient, sustainable, biophilic design strategy. What do students do? Well, they don't study, at least not all the time, but they do a lot of hanging out. You have to sometimes think that by puncturing and losing accommodation, you can actually create hangout spaces which also allow these corridors to be naturally lit. You then start being true to and honoring a notion of biophilic design. I think that's incredibly important to understand that. You've got to actually understand how this will work in terms of social interaction. One of the things about the second Bauhaus, which amazed me when I went to it, was how many spaces there are where rooms are set back off corridors to allow for accidental conversations to happen. You know, from working in this building, you fall into conversation with your colleagues in kind of accidental spaces. Allows space for social interaction along these corridors, which also can have environmental benefit. So I honestly think this should be here, this should be here, and dare I say it, I think there's another way that if you were really clever with the geometry, this is in here. And then it becomes part of that route through the building. That is actually the nexus. This is Long Beach, California. When did it last rain? You know, I mean, come on. Does it? I've no idea. It's a long time since I've been to Southern California. Anyway, but the point is that that's an assembly point. It deserves to be in here. And if you'd thought about cranking this in a different way, you could stop my facetious comments about trees saying help. You could actually get light into these blocks. And you could actually honor this thing about it being a social hub. I mean, I'm sorry to sound critical, but these things to me are a result of a certain, dare I say it, overconfidence in the design and not standing back quite enough to be self-critical about the things which aren't quite right.
I think a couple sections, like we mentioned with your previous colleague there, street sections through longitude, latitude, and showing not just the building, but the streetscape could help provide some influence on maybe what your elevations wanted to be, provide a little bit of guidance. If this is, you know, to be a heart and a part of the campus, would like to see a little bit more of the building. The campus axon down here helps, but to see a little bit more of how this new fabric you're introducing along this street relates or doesn't relate to the surrounding buildings. It doesn't always have to be an identical, right, match. Sometimes when it stands out and doesn't, it, you know, it provides that focal point you're looking for on the campus, but can't quite tell that without the sort of sections that help provide that connection. Biophilic design can take on so many different methods. We've seen a lot of plants and trees physically brought into the building, but biophilia, material choice, color choice, fabric choice, imitation of branching, there are a lot of different design elements other than live vegetation that can be used throughout a building to create the biophilia. And I'd really love, similar to one of the presentations we saw in the morning, if biophilia is going to be one of your design principles, taking the design to that next step that allows us to see more of material choice, color choice, pattern choice. And it's also, it's sound. It's not just visual and texture, it's also sound and, you know, as well as sight. So I think that next level of design here, and also agree that there's a lot of potential with this site, you know, to really bring in that natural daylight. And I agree that incorporating that amphitheater a little bit more into being the focal, the nexus of your building could really help influence and alleviate some of the things we've talked about here, both from a security standpoint, you know, eliminating an extra entrance, and yet, you know, that becomes enveloped in becoming a sense of natural light, and providing a little bit more room that I think your plan and your programming is looking for to make it a really great space that the kids are going to want to hang out in.
So I want to just note that I agree. I feel like, you know, I just want to bend this and crank it and erode the southern building, because if you think about the way that the light travels and thinking about working with nature, the solar orientation is key. So you would think that this building is a much different building and steps down and gives a little bit more breathing room to the north building, right? So, I mean, those are, I'm being critical because I think you can take it and you know what we're talking about here. I do think the architecture, like, it is somewhat frustrating because I love your precedents and I think you did a lot of research and you understand those concepts. but I'm a student in a box, and I don't want to be a student in a box in this project because there's so many cool things going on here. Wish there was some more breathing room, but I really want some contact with nature, right? And I don't get it. I don't get it through natural light. The windows are these tiny punched windows. Can I open my window? Can I have a garden box outside my window? What makes it, as a student living here, much more interesting than any other place? I mean, you're dreaming, right? This is a pretend project. I know you're conscious of, the finances, but push that envelope and give me a place that I want to be. Like, is there like a bookshelf in my unit that relates to the library? Just something that ties those big ideas that you have into something that's pretty unique. If I'm a student, I want to live in one of these for one thing, because those are amazing. I don't know that this is architecture though, I will say that. That to me is not a roof structure that is supportable. I'm missing structure there, right? We always say, there should be, if this is your floor sandwich, then that as the roof sandwich needs to be at least that thick, and I need to see details. And I want the windows to be operable and big and human proportions, so I have some relationship to things. So there are a number of things that I think would take it to that next level. I do agree with this. You have all of that back of house, right? Your program was really good. You have a lot of back of house, dead wall. Bury that stuff into your topography, the stuff that doesn't need natural light, so that the elements of their program and the tree that need natural light get a little bit more of that. So, a number of things, but overall, really good and intuitive. There.
Very quickly, I would maybe offer just two things. This is a gateway building, is something that you mentioned. Just the site that you chose and it being at the top of this long street, and then, sort of the traffic bends, I think, and you get into the southern campus. And so it's a gateway building, and I'm not seeing much. I don't think I understand this building architecturally. I understand the form, but I just see 6 floors of punched windows. I'm not sure what material, what materials you're building this out of, what color this building is supposed to be on the outside, what the context of the rest of the campus is. Just those things. You've got a lot of the efficiencies, I imagine, figured out, but is it a white building? Is there some value in articulating the bottom floors as library to the top 6 floors as housing? I want to get into some architecture a little bit, because it really has this really special place on campus, and like it or not, it's going to be one of the buildings that everyone wants to come see, because it's so different. It's so different.
First, I have a few questions. Well, observations. It seems that you made yourself a self-imposed building restriction line. Is that correct? Where, you have this full site. So I would wonder why you didn't push the buildings out to the edge to keep the street line, if you will, which then, as everybody has been saying, would give you more courtyard space, right? And it would solve the problem, especially when you look at that sun study. That's summer sun, and winter sun is even lower, and all those things. So if you wanted to, from a real estate development and your program and your return on investment, and you have to have that number of floors to, make, as I'm learning from my developer friends, pencil out so that it works. Give yourself more space in the courtyard would have made more sense. Then that library could have had a different dynamic with your ability of putting housing with the library, because then the library would have more room to be jewel-like, to be like an Apple store, to be something that is the nexus of the campus, and people can go through. And it's almost like an internal retail area, but it's, it's retail for knowledge, if you will, because it's the library. And And you still could have had 2 levels of parking underground again. That costs more, but that could make it viable for getting rid of the parking to get the return on the rents for the student housing. We're actually working on graduate student housing for this university over on the eastern side of the campus. And so every square foot counts. You know, and really this could have been more of a donut scheme so that you didn't have to build another set of elevators and all of that stuff that the developers care about. Again, that makes your project pencil out. Remember that. I didn't know that term before working with developers. And so I just think that the missing opportunity here is what we've all been saying, push to the perimeter, make a truly urban building, and give the heart of that building to the campus, back to the campus, and not just be a passageway.
Did you want this? I thought you were. I just wanted to jump in and say something that strikes me is that idea of penciling it out has to do with trade-offs. And so, you know, you have to satisfy the developer. In this case, you have to satisfy the client because the client's the university and the university is doing a public-private venture here. And it strikes me is that the university, if I were the university's architect, I would be saying, I don't want student accommodations here. I want public space all along that ground floor to animate the elevated courtyard, the courtyard of this reconstituted ground plane. The second thing is that I've had a hard time conceptualizing this, and maybe you can do a sidebar afterwards with Brianna. I think that space ought to harken back to the kinds of spaces that James Sterling made in the Neustadtsgalerie, in the Cologne project, in the project for the Westphalia project. Those spaces that are 24/7 public service. In the project that you built for University of District of Columbia, you have a connection to James Sterling. He was your teacher. So so these 24/7 spaces, and this is built in a university here in the District of Columbia that was transformative, and it is a nexus space. It connects the city to the campus. Beforehand, the campus had no connection whatsoever. You'd walk past and go, I'm not going to go there ever again. So I think that space has to operate that way. And at some point, maybe you come in at an upper level and drop down to the lower level or vice versa and move through that space. I think it needs to be a public circulation space. And then maybe at one level, the library, you know, because of the change in contour, can be one floor plate. You know, it's not, it's a kind of three-dimensional modeling thing. So there's things to think about there and a lot of good things here. And Professor Simon, we have a huge technical flipping of things. We're going to take a break after this for a minute so we can flip things. You can wrap up.
Well, I hate to interrupt the great conversation in order to wrap up, but I do have a few things to say. First of all, congratulations, Brianna. I have to say, it really has been a pleasure working with Brianna this semester for many reasons. One of them is the rigorous research that we didn't even have time to hear about today that led you to your site, to your program and so forth. Another is that I really value our dual degree programs. And I enjoyed this opportunity to work with Brianna and my colleague in real estate development, Tanya Bonsall, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. So I think that the dual concerns of architecture and real estate development shaped this project in such interesting ways throughout the semester, transforming Brianna's initial ideas about a library focused on wellness into a project that was really so much more and involved so many conflicting priorities. So it made it a very interesting, if nerve-wracking semester, right? So I want to say that I'm confident that as Brianna graduates and moves into practice, that not only will she be generating creative ideas, but she'll be developing creative development strategies for actually making sure that those creative ideas get translated into built form. You've received a rigorous critique today, and I think that it should offer insight that you'll carry forward into your professional career. And I believe that the robust discussion that we had means that everyone bought into the premise, which was actually pretty radical. And no one appeared to be bored. Everyone absolutely jumped in and offered some really sound critique. I wish we had another semester to collaborate on implementing everything you heard today, but I think it's time for you to, say goodbye to your education and move forward into practice. So thank you for a great semester, and, all of my best wishes for the great career that I know will follow.
Thank you so much.
So folks, we have a little bit of flipping to do here. If you want to go over and get a coffee, if you want to do a restroom break, we're going to start at the top of the hour at 4 p.m. We have 2 more to go. We'll be right here. We just have to flip some of these panels around.
Well, so you have to take everything down now, and I'm going to help you.
The presentation is just called Final Thesis. Yeah, so thank you.
This has a pointer. Let's pick it. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So it's this button. You can point to it. You know, like a cat. You know, look at it. There we are. Look at that. Thanks, Kenny. Oh, throw this away. You don't want this water bottle in front of you. All right. Take a breather. Yeah.
Mr. Renzo, how are you?
Hi, how's it going?
Good to see you. Okay, sorry, last year, now this is it, huh?
Yeah.
All right. All right, very good.
It's it. Oh, there's also sleeping.
And the old ones.
What?
These banners.
Talk about a center.
Center. It's there's a there there.
Let's kick on this part.
Yeah, your name and.
Together.
Yes. Well, I just, they don't make it. Yeah. Takes nice architecture. Every once in a while, like across campus. It's in the rain.
Yeah.
Like actually.
Well, it's a year behind. Yeah. I did not, but I did take a list.
I wish there were more cross pollination. I think schedule What it was like so far.
So question for you. Is this like a, is that a pencil filter on top of SketchUp or something, or?
Yeah, no, it's the rendering program. Yeah.
So Lumion has this graphic built in, or you just put a filter on top of it after you export the image?
It has part of it, but then I also take it.
Yeah, to tighten things up.
Yeah. To make it more conceptual, like plausibility, right?
Yeah.
Fully realistic.
Yeah. What's nice is that you've got it, consistently right across, so you sort of years.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, I really worked on that.
Yeah, that really comes through. That's good.
Thank you.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Pretty nice.
I shouldn't talk about it.
Well, it's more like editing out what not to say because you don't want to push it off.
Yeah.
But most everybody will submit their review finished too fast. Like everyone will talk about 10 minutes and then they feel that they should.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty interesting. Because it's different than what it's being said.
Yeah. Yeah, I did try to make create a that was especially out of the states. Yeah. Really interesting. And then also getting the chance to travel. This was the first time I went.
Oh yeah.
I'll be back in 1 second.
That's great.
I'm gonna run to the little architect's room and I'll be back in a second.
Yeah.
Okay. People are.
Yeah. Yeah, me and my whole family. Yeah. Yeah, my design changed.
That's how it's supposed to be. Right? Yeah, once you, well, because once you walk the site, you start feeling it and walking it, yeah. But still. You ready?
Yeah.
You want to take a picture? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know, some of them were watching.
Oh, that's right, it's stream, that's right. You mean YouTube?
Even my cousin from like Europe.
Are your parents here?
No, they're still at work.
Okay. They can. They can, it's broadcast and everything.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy how it works.
Yeah. Pretty good. This is your show. You know, take ownership of it. You need to be an actor, we need to, but it's a big thing, man, a big moment. It's time to shine right there. Be open-minded to the question of whatever comes with it.
Yeah, no, I've worked in big.
Yeah, exactly. But if you have a response, you can always respond. Don't get paid.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I try to add, or I added,
yeah, no, I like that. Come on, turn out a little bit dark.
Yeah,
that's
that
really
was-
nice. Yeah, like you know, that could turn out really nice. That was.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, come on back for the final 2 acts of this afternoon's bouts here. In the Pietra Serena trunks, Bruno Lesky. We're looking this way. We're looking south at the moment. On a overcast and rainy day like today, hard to know what direction is what. Okay, I need this. don't want to block this. Yeah, stand over there. You can walk back and forth. You just don't want to stand here.
Yeah.
Because you're in front of them. They got to see it. So just stand over here.
Oh, oh, yeah.
Okay. So we're shifting now into themes that are more focused on dwelling and creating urban dwelling. And Renzo Moran is going to take us to Peru. Renzo's a native Peruvian, but he hadn't been back until this semester to actually investigate his site. He took a week and went back, and it was a great opportunity for Renzo to really get a reality check on what the site was all about. And Renzo's committee is comprised of Professor Abrams, who's right there, and Professor Gabrielli, who seems like she's a little chilled over there. Rain kind of set us. Yeah. And Renzo, take us just outside of Lima to your site, okay?
So, hi, my name is. Oh, sorry.
I didn't hear a thing until you have to put it like really close to your mouth.
Hi, my name is Renzo Moran, and this is my thesis proposal, Cultivating Peruvian Roots. So first and foremost, just a big thanks to my committee members, friends and family, everyone that's really helped support me through this journey. And starting off, just illustrating the table of contents and showing how this proposal has pushed forward to where it is now. So the thesis proposal of this is establishing or improving the quality of life of people within this area, since a lot of these people live in informal settlements and they don't really have the best quality of life living in this area. And then also using established components already present within the area, such as agriculture, for a means of self-sustenance, and then also for job opportunities. So really just touching base on that, the scope of this proposal is really trying to build a self-sustaining community where these people can thrive and prosper and use its local material sources and food sources to not only prosper, but also set themselves up for the future generation. So Lima, Peru, it's located, it's within Latin America, which boasts a lot of different countries spanning from Central to South America. It's the second largest city within Latin America, and it boasts many different districts within the area. Looking into what's the different districts within Lima, since it's divided up to many different areas, the southwest, east, north, and then metropolitan Lima. This proposal primarily looks at the southern part of Lima, predominantly looking towards the coastal area called Lurin. This area spans between different biomes from the coast all the way to the mountainous regions as well. So brief history, this area was established in the early 19th century. It was established off of the temple of the Lurin River, and it's been predominantly always an agricultural sector where many of the people here thrive off growing local nutrients and using it as a source for income. The demographics here within the area comprises mostly of younger people, typically because it's a very work-heavy area. Many of the people here cater to a lot of jobs ranging from industrial, agricultural, and other job opportunities as well like that. There's a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, specifically the main ethnic group that pertains to this area is called mestizos, and there are a mix of indigenous with Spanish colonial roots. And this area is primarily Catholic, since within this area, or all of Lima and Peru, religion is a very key factor for the community and also for the family. So going back to the agricultural sector, it's a very key component to this area. A lot of Peru in general is a huge exporter for the global economy. They provide a lot of, they range from a lot of different crops, such as from vegetables to fruits to potatoes, as they span a wide host of different grains and vegetables. Depending on the different biomes, whether it be on the coast, or the subtropical coast, or the mountainous region, the different variety of crops changes. This area is also a very touristic heavy area, as it's located near the Pachacamac site, which is a pre-Incan archaeological site. It brings many people all over the globe yearly during the summers predominantly. The area also boasts a lot of farmers markets, which not only brings different people to the area, but also helps boast its community and other familiar sectors. Going off of that, one of the main issues that Lima in general faces is an unstable growth rate. The metropolitan Lima, unfortunately, has no more area for it to grow. And at this moment, they are looking for different areas to construct new living quarters, duplexes, and so on. And because many of these people cannot afford to build with local resources, they typically create these informal settlements, which begin to raid a lot of these important and cultural sectors, such as Pachacamac, which here you can see on the right-hand sector of how close the informal settlement, Julio Ceteo settlement, is imposing onto the archaeological site. And unfortunately, since the local government, they don't have the resources or the money for combating this issue, the settlements continue to grow and also impact the environment and its local communities. What also increases too is unfortunately crime rate, as because of these new areas, a lot of people don't have economic opportunities as others, as within this region too, many people over the age of 18 do not pursue further education, which then limits their job opportunities for themselves and typically pushes these people towards a negative sector, whether it be crime rate or other things. This area, Lurin in general, is heavily based upon the law of the Indies rule, which is seen throughout a lot of Latin America, and predominantly in Lima as the Spanish colonial came and established these different sectors, always basing off a social civic area of a plaza, and then always a religious sector facing the other way. And then always creating these different blocks to really establish whether these homes or these other public sectors. So looking at
chose that, but I appreciate that it's ambitious. I would like to have heard more about the architecture, actually, because from your renderings, it looks really interesting and cool, and you mentioned local materials, but we haven't heard a whole lot about that. But back to the community planning, I'm wondering, like, is there governance? Is there, where's the water coming from? If this is totally self-sustaining, is there livestock? Who picks up the trash? There's all these elements to designing a community and then really describing it that I'm not expecting you to know, because that's not necessarily your discipline. But on the other hand, if you're going to design it, then we kind of want to know.
Oh, well, sorry, touch basing on that, it should have been illustrated, but right across this building right here, it's animal, what do you call?
Livestock? Okay.
Area, so where
Okay.
they sell um animals for agricultural. And then on the farther side, over here, that's where they produce local brick, concrete, and other material sources too.
Can you talk about the water source? Because you had mentioned it's a very dry, arid place, and yet you've got agriculture that needs water. So what is the water source?
So the water source was there are supposed to be rain capturing systems, which would be implemented as to, because over in Peru, all the roofing systems, they're all flat because it rarely rains. The reason behind having low slopes roofs within this area would be so there would be rain catching barrels for when it does decide to rain. And then people collect some water there, but then there will also be cisterns located all around the plant too.
Thank you. So I'm intrigued about your choice of the prominent building in this community being a library. On one hand, I do like that. I think it's cool. I think libraries can be incubators for um, uh, changing a profession, helping you do other things and learning and all that. But I'm puzzled because wouldn't this be more suitable to a farmer's market or something like that that can actually help? He has one. Okay, so I didn't understand that. So there's a farmer's market in this?
Yeah,
component?
there's four. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. They're right here. In this diagram,
Okay.
sorry. They're illustrate.
Okay, okay, that's
Yeah.
good.
Sorry about
didn't-
that.
No, it's all right. I didn't understand that initially. So this library, it kind of is the end of this market bounded by the church on the other side.
Yes.
I see. Okay. And is that the back of the library or facing the main road where is that like a gateway to the community?
Yes, it was supposed to act as a gateway, just because this whole road is a threshold and a gateway to go towards southern Lima.
Yeah.
So in order to
Everybody
pass
goes
through,
right through there.
you have to pass through this area.
So one thing, and this is an old Miesian saying, right? That form follows function, right? There is honor and purpose on solving issues that are mundane, but are very, very practical and crucial, like service, like is there a back to this building? Where are things gonna go through? Is that then facing the main road and what kind of gateway that's doing? Also, when I'm looking at the making of the building in the section, there's a lack of structural integrity to the design. I'm seeing a curtain wall that goes right through a floor plate with glass going right through that floor plate. So I'm a little surprised about the lack of detail and the lack of attention to these things at the level of a thesis review.
Just really quick, the internet's back on, so we're back on Facebook, YouTube, just to let you know that. And I believe Lou Sullivan was plagiarized by our friend Mies.
The public building certainly requires a little bit more structural thought. It is interesting that the private stuff, the houses are traditional architecture, but when we get to the public building, it's like, here's what I really want to do. I want to do this kind of modern job here, you know, and bring these folks into the 21st century. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is the sort of, there's a lot of very nice things that are very thoughtfully dealt with, you know, in the thesis, Renzo. And in particular, you know, I like that drawing there. And I think some of these, like the courtyard here, I think is rather compelling. And I can't quite figure out that multifamily building, but, you know, I think a lot of buildings over history, if you stick a courtyard in the middle of it, people will figure out how to use the edges. And so I'm not going to get deep into that. And then adding on to it seems like something that could happen over time. And I think that's probably something that would be good to plan for in a community like this. What I think is the issue for me is I think the urban spaces are huge, you know, and I wonder if just tightening the whole thing up would actually give it a better sense of place. So for example, you tell me that this is 100 meters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for putting a graphic scale on the drawing there. Good. Way to go, Renzo. That's 100 meters. You know, that's a very wide space, right? And it makes me, you know, and even though it looks kind of compelling there, I sort of think that if it was half that size, right? And you could make this stuff much more compact, which would give you more of this stuff, this agricultural stuff at the edges, possibly even here, where I think somebody pointed out how this axis ends, which I think would help that end. I wonder, the other place I wonder is whether I really think it's a good idea to have the agricultural stuff divide this from that. And I think the community gets a little stronger as a place if this stuff is closer to that stuff, or even if this stuff was in the middle of that stuff, so that I got the sense that there was a clear center, and the center had stuff that animated it by people coming in from several sides there, and that the spaces, I mean, the width of this residential space, which has, is this a house, these two, the red and the gray?
Yeah.
That's one house?
Yeah.
So it's 1, 2, 3.
No, that's 2 houses.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's only 8 houses, 16 houses on either side there. You know, of that isn't a whole lot, you know, differentiated from this. So I end up thinking, what I would really like is to have this incredible jewel of a community surrounded by these beautiful fields that have colors and different kind of characters to them. And that once I get out of this big open spaces here, this stuff is almost like kind of a buffer. I have this incredibly compact, walkable place that is changes my scale of reference from a broad open landscape into something that's much more intimate and walkable. And at the same time, I think it would probably help to add more units. You know, 120 some odd units to me just seems, there's something very light about that. And I could see you could triple that and it would probably animate this village more and make it more realistic. So a rat-faced developer could come in and do something.
So I think there's been a little mission drift here. And I think that one of the things that Renzo started off with was the idea that each single-family housing unit would have an adequate amount of land to create a sustenance garden. And then someplace that got lost with these overly wide mini Rambla streets that traded that off to a public realm that was probably too much for the scale of this. So I'm putting that there because I think that this isn't doing what it set out to do.
Yes. First of all, I want to commend you on this work. It's really very well thought out. And I liked your introduction about the way of the Latin way of organizing a town. But I'm sorry to see that you didn't follow that. And it has a lot of potential for it. You started with the church, one end, and the public building on the other end, which is the library. But it's isolated on one side. And then you have all the housing on the other. When the traditional way that the town grows around that circle. It's around that middle square that people then start to populate and to live. And that would be, I think, one way that you may want to think about it, because then after the houses, then you can have all the agricultural land, so people are closer to the land that they're actually working on. But it's a very good project. I love this panel here, so thank you. Congratulations.
Thank
I think it's a really charming project. There's a lot of things that are not quite right in relation to the ratios between the land which sustains the community and the community itself. I think the three types of ramblers, that's strategically problematic. I think you could have been generous in terms of the amount of landscape allocated to this middle group where you've got the three vertical ramblers with, as our colleague says, with half the space. And then it gets back to that idea of you've got a strip of land which you can cultivate, which is specific to the house. You know, that's a farming business model, which is not just in Latin America, it's a sustainable model throughout Europe and the Americas. This is very elegant, but completely implausible at a technological level, but I don't really care because it could be still made to work with, I suspect, something very simple. You could actually metal frame these roofs with stuff that people could weld together on the ramblers, you know, and it would be perfectly okay. I've been to Peru quite a few times. I love the country. I think it's one of the most fascinating places on earth with some of the most progressive social policies. The idea that deeds are given to informal settlers so they actually become citizens with assets is incredibly clever. It's absolutely brilliant. I mean, you know, try doing that in Western Europe. Yeah, I mean, you enfranchise an informal settler so they become a citizen, you know, and then every smartest child in every family is given free university education. I mean, you know, it's a model for Latin American development, in my view. The library, in my opinion, absolutely bang on. My colleague here said, well, what about the schools? And she's dead right, of course, where is the damn school? But the library is a building type that, for example, in Colombia with the cable car schemes, the library and a gallery is often the key building at the cable car station because they're using the library in a way that's different from our definition of the library. So I think there are so many targets that you've hit here. There's lots of things which aren't quite right, but it has a modesty to it, which at the same time is not small-minded. You've got a grasp of different types of urban space. It's a place I would like to be. And I think the idea that you produce this as a prototype for the development of this kind of not great land, which in other terms is kind of going to go to waste. I think your government would like to see more of this. So well done. You know, it's flawed, but you know, every thesis scheme is flawed. But the things you get right, I think, are far outweigh the objections.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think this is interesting in all the ways just discussed. And there's another element that you brought up in your presentation, which was the archaeological site nearby. And this this tension and this unhealthy relationship presently between the settlement pattern and the archaeological heritage. And you kind of chose to freeze the sprawl and wall it from that archaeological heritage, and it really disappears from the concept. But did you think about maybe making the project something that would heal that relationship and create some integration between the settlement pattern and the archaeological site?
Yes, initially, I was thinking about, as you said, finding kind of like the bridge or gap to like amend those two different factors. But what kind of halted me was the safety and security within those informal settlements, and especially within Latin America. You, in order to not be accepted or what's the word? It's amend those that informal settlement and try to help them is a little bit difficult at times due to safety reasons and the way their sorry how things work within the informal settlements. So those were that was one of the reasons why I decided to just to create instead this new community that would halt the production of more informal settlements and bring them here where there are new opportunities for them that would put them towards a better path.
Thank you.
I'm still ambulatory. I just wear different shoes tomorrow. These shoes are killing me.
Thanks, Brian.
Fashion will get you everything.
Okay, so I think a lot of the ideas are compelling, and I think we all are intrigued by the model. Just a couple of thoughts, because it is intriguing, is we talk about this arid landscape and how to sustain maybe 300 people, let's call it. I don't know, but my research shows it's at least an acre per person to sustain someone. So I think the ratio is off that other people mentioned. I think a way to combat that and also deal with an arid environment, instead of, all those cisterns are fine for this community, but in the end, they deplete further the river that you've already said was being depleted. What you could investigate, you have a lot of agricultural buildings. Maybe some of those could be vertical farms with a closed loop system that uses hydroponics and, have fish and the water collection, but it's contained within a building so that you're not constantly depleting, you're actually using that and recycling that water. You could look at that for the wastewater as well. How do you treat gray water here so you can reuse that in the agriculture to help support this community? Just another thought, it's an arid landscape. You have a lot of solar potential here. Could that be used also as a green energy to help people and then to advance, to have lights and energy and, networks and everything to connect this further? You need a way to do that. This is a perfect environment for that, but it's not the perfect environment really for agriculture, standard agriculture. So I think looking at systems that could be a closed loop system would be really advantageous in this type of arid community.
Those are really interesting comments, and I think one of the things that strikes me is that this is a very forward-looking project relative to climate change. Being able to self-sustain ourselves with agriculture and stuff, and I think that's great. One thing I think is always problematic in any kind of greenfield kind of thing, which is what this is, maybe sort of sienna-colored field, I suppose, but is it's always tougher to make things small in urban design. And you have to look carefully to be able to do that. And I was very much taken by some of those earlier Incan little courtyard buildings you showed there. And I wonder, it strikes me that those could have been more of a model, because I suspect that they're pretty closely packed on the streets and stuff. And you could make rather beautiful narrow streets and it wouldn't be a problem, and it'd give you more agricultural land. And I think sometimes there's a sort of lurking Beaux-Artsism in this plan, both in terms of the organization and the sizes of things. And I don't necessarily think that's bad relative to the organization, but relative to the next level, which is the size of things and the relationship of the building to the size of the open space outside, probably it would be better if those things were recalibrated,
Okay.
Well, now's the time to conclude, and I'll give this over to the chair.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to the jury. Renzo, I never had the pleasure of having you as a student in other classes, but it's been a real pleasure working with you in this thesis. I know when we started working together, I realized that Renzo is a very hardworking individual that has a huge passion for the field of architecture and incredibly pride for his Peruvian heritage. And I'm glad you were able to do something in your homeland. I know you came to the United States when you were very young, and I commend you for doing such a wonderful prototype that you should be very proud of. I know we were cut off with YouTube, but I would still encourage you to present this down to the Luring community. You know, the zoning building department, take this project over there, tell them, look, this is my gift from me to you. Because I think they will really appreciate all your hard work. This is a year's work. And I think this is part one of presentation. Part two is presenting over there to the community. Don't let it just die here, right? And I commend your hard work and your beautiful graphics. So congratulations, and I wish you all the best in your future career.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, this is the last project for today. So we're going to be on this side. I'll move my little ambulatory station over here.
This drop. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, thank gosh. Is this the clicker? Yes. Oh. This is so awkward. Awkward. I gotta press and hold this.
Okay, folks, settle. Get yourself in a nice relaxing chair. We are leaving Peru and coming to Washington, D.C. And we're going to be looking at affordable housing strategies for the unhoused in Washington, D.C. And presenting will be Megan Bugby. And her committee was Professor Burke. Professor Burke there, over on the side there, and Professor Curry and myself. And before you present, I do want to say that I want to thank Fabian Gomez, Kenny Noyen, and the staff of TSC for keeping this all running today, even though we had a university-wide glitch with the internet. It wasn't just here, it wasn't their fault. These guys have been doing a great job with us. I want to thank Paula Riff for feeding us. And I want to thank Yelena in our communications department for getting all this information on the web. So if you want to go home tonight, and you can't remember what you said, and you really want to go back and review these things, it's on YouTube. You can just watch it again. Okay, you can do that, Megan, just later on. You probably will. So anyhow, Megan, take it away.
Hello, thank you. My name is Megan Bugby, and this is Home on 7th and P, a homeless shelter for DC, for single males as well. I'm also going to be using the word homeless. I know people use unhoused or unsheltered, but I'll be using homeless just so everybody knows. Okay. So I'd like to introduce you to this lovely man. His name is Milton. He has lived in DC for the past 2 decades. He's 59 years old, he's a veteran, and he has a political science degree. So essentially, he is just like you and I. Although he has been homeless for the past 10 years in DC, living on the streets due to losing his job and a poor relationship he was in at the time. And to this day, he still has nowhere to store his personal belongings. And he talks about how being unhoused and homeless in that community is a very uncertain lifestyle. You never know where you're going to be sleeping that night, where your next meal is going to be. And it's overall just a sad and scary life. Although Milton tries to do some good for himself, he is connected with a church in DC. And he can go there, he can shave, shower, get cleaned up for the day, and they also provide him a fresh lunch, which is really great. And he also has a caseworker that he is connected with at this shelter, or it's more of a day center, and they have helped him get onto a housing list. I tried to do some digging. I'm not sure if that went through, but in the interview, he said that he was not very positive about that. Didn't have much hope for it. And these are just 2 examples of the day centers in DC that are most advertised. I just wanted to throw those in there because the exterior appearance of them is not overly welcoming. And I think that's something that I'm trying to address throughout this presentation. So these are a couple more examples of the homeless shelter systems in DC. A couple of them have closed, but the overall look and feel of them is very unwelcoming. Milton talks about how he is really thankful for the shelters and that they do offer a place for him to go in extreme weather, but he tries his hardest to avoid going to them because there's violent people there. He's afraid he's going to get beat up. So he tries to avoid it at all costs, which is, again, a really sad situation that he'd prefer to sleep outside rather than in a shelter. And towards the end of the interview, he kind of talks about some of the things that he wished would change in the near future. So he talks about job training would be really great for the community, just so people could get up on their feet, even if it was a temporary job. And then he also talks about how it would be really nice if there was a cheaper place to wash his clothes, because if he has to go somewhere, he has to find coins to do that, and then he has to stand in line all day, and eventually it's eaten up his whole day, and he's gotten nothing done besides washing a couple things. And then he ends the interview by saying he just doesn't have any hope anymore. Just really, really sad. So that being said, there's not all bad in DC. So in the past 8 years, DC has tried to update a lot of their facilities. The first wave of this updated services that they were trying to provide was more dedicated towards families that were experiencing homelessness. So, which is great, but then there's another aspect inside to that. So who are all of these single individuals? Where are they going? Are they still living in those poor conditions, sleeping on the streets? What's the next phase of this project that they have been starting? And based off of the demographics, you can see by 2018, that's when a majority of the changes started happening, and the families drastically decreased. But the number above is 10 times more for single individuals that are still experiencing homelessness in DC. That being said, this is Home on 7th and P. When I was looking for a site for this project, I really wanted to find a gap in the urban fabric that these types of individuals were already congregating at. And I stumbled across this one pretty close to Logan Circle, if you're familiar. And we're right on the edge of the residential zone in a mixed use zone. So this is my site right here. This is all residential. This is mixed use. So trying to make those blend together was one of the first challenges I tried to address. So like I said, I'm just a couple blocks over from Logan Circle, and just south a couple blocks is the convention center. The main entrance to the building is off of P Street, right here. That is mainly due to give these residents a sense of privacy when entering the building, opposed to entering off of 7th Street, because that's a much busier corridor for public transportation and other businesses. Another problem or idea that I was trying to address is because I'm sitting in the middle of a mixed-use community and a residential community, how do I blend those two together? So you can see here on the diagram below, there is a very rigid block pattern, or townhouse pattern is what they are. And I wanted to mimic that and bring that into my building while also trying to connect to the higher density mixed-use zone. When you're homeless, a lot of the time you feel like everybody is staring at you, that you're an outlier in society. So making the architecture blend into the surrounding context, but also have a welcoming feeling was really important. So some of the big things that drove this project was the programmatic aspects. So having the ability to have access to healthcare, administrative services, a library and study spaces to maybe get back up on your feet and learn new life skills, kitchen, fitness center, garden areas. And then because this is a shelter, we're housing people. So in total, the building has 48 dwelling units and houses 72 people. So getting into the floor plans a little bit, I have the first, second, and third shown up here on the boards. The first floor is a lot of mixed-use spaces. I am in that mixed-use zone, so if this project ever developed in the future, having a strong storefront facade was really important. So that basically houses all of the administrative areas, the classrooms, and the healthcare wing. As you make your way up through the building, it gets more into those dwelling units, along with some large carved-out spaces for events. And you can see here in the elevations and up here that the building is also trying to make this gesture towards the higher density mixed-use zone. So we'll go back to Milton. If he was getting approved to go into transitional housing, if he was getting approved to go into transitional housing, the first thing that he would kind of be welcomed into in this building is the admin wing, where he would meet with a new caseworker. He would kind of get the lay of the land of what this building is about, if there's rules, what his new schedule would look like, and what's expected of him. Next, he would most likely go over to the healthcare center where he would get a physical. If he had some sort of illness or medication that he needed to be prescribed, he could do that there, along with checking out the therapy wing, which is that lower rendering right there, which residents would attend weekly. Then moving through the rest of the building, it kind of is comprised of a couple different moving parts that all work together. So there's that learning aspect, which has those classrooms, some open study spaces, along with like private study rooms. And those would obviously be used for if you were trying to apply for a new job, you could go to the computer room, or if you were taking a class to finish your degree of some sort, you could do that here. And then we have this other moving part, which are these healthy spaces. And those are comprised of a lounge with an outdoor terrace shown right here, along with a gym. And these spaces were really important because when you're homeless, you don't have access to a gym, to just normal facilities where you can sit down and hang out with friends. So it was really important to be able to give that back to this group of people that were going without and kind of felt left out from the rest of society. And then following with those healthy spaces is a greenhouse and a outdoor garden, little courtyard area. And that can help provide produce for the kitchen on the first floor, along with giving some of the residents a new hobby to look forward to. So there's also these private spaces and communal spaces. We've seen a couple of them of the gardens and the lounge, but there's also these libraries. It's like an open library, and then a large event space for parties and gatherings and such like that. But at the same time, we do need to remember that these are homeless individuals. They had just come off of the street. They have a wild background. So this new building that has rules and new people in it, it might be very overwhelming for the client. So being able to go back to your dwelling unit, your apartment, to kind of self-reflect, calm down, and have that quiet time is also really important. Speaking of units, the building has 3 different types of units. There are single units, standing in the way of it. There's 2 different types of single units, and those are more of a studio apartment idea. We have 8 double units, so you'd have a roommate and a shared living space. And then there are 5 quad units where you would be living with 3 other roommates, along with also a living space in those apartments. So getting into how the building is kind of put together, I am using mass timber, so glue lamppost and beam and CLT cross-laminated panels, and that is mainly because of the warmth and sturdiness that brings to the building, which is really important to make this new atmosphere feel welcoming to these individuals. With that, I kind of touched on how this building needs to fit into the surrounding context. So the materials on the facade were chosen based on the immediate context. So brick and metal panels are widely used in the DC area, so that seemed like a no-brainer. But then tying in some of that warmth onto the exterior also seemed like it was needed. So having a wood cladding that kind of mixes in with the heavy timber on the interior felt like the right move. And then lastly, the roof, there's an expansive green roof, mainly to help catch water, use that for the garden spaces, and recycle it back into the building. So this large section perspective that you all are looking at kind of is broken down by these different moving parts that I've been kind of talking about. So there's that healthcare idea. So coming in off of 7th Street over here is the main lobby to that, and then you would go downstairs for all of the private rooms and doctor's offices. The first floor is all of that like learning wing that I've kind of talked about. So there's those classrooms, the administrative wing, dining hall is all on the first floor, very communal space. And then as you move your way up, like I've talked about, is those dwelling units and those large double height carved out spaces. So this is that large event space, the 2-story gym, and then over here, or on the screen, you can see there is these lofted open library spaces that there was a couple renderings of. And that, doing all of that, it kind of breaks the building up horizontally, but also keeping it connected vertically with these lofted spaces. And lastly, I just wanted to show you a short film of the building. So sorry. Boy, oh, there we go. This would be the main entrance off of P Street, going into a lobby where you can get checked in. This is the administrative wing, one of those first spaces that you'd be welcomed into. That large event space for parties, events, and gatherings. One of the open libraries. This is on the fourth floor of the lounge with that outdoor patio and the greenhouse with the outdoor garden. This is the healthcare clinic lobby off of 7th Street. That'll fly around the building. Thank you so much.
Have the implement of criticism right here.
Well, I won't be using it for criticism. This is the first wall section I've seen all day. Not that I was in the morning sessions, but exploded axons, materiality, very thoughtful program model. Just, the context, understanding the context and illustrating that and talking about that and bringing that into a building's language and actually sharing that. Your interior spaces are very believable and articulated. I've visited many nonprofits that deal with mental health and substance abuse lately, since starting over again. And I will say that even from your check-in process through to the units, I think you nailed that. So you did probably a good
Thank
amount
you.
of research and understanding on that. I'm very impressed. I don't have many critiques, and that's unusual. So I will say kudos. I don't know I guess the only question I have is, what is all that other underground space used for on that lower level?
So there is mechanical space down there, but this kind of expansive space, the idea was to maybe further develop that into storage units of some sort for the residents. Like Milton kind of talked about, he has no place to store his belongings. At the same time, how many belongings would these residents really have? But this is transitional housing, so the idea was that they would stay for 2 to 24 months. So that could be used for just more storage, essentially.
I guess I will also, add another positive here. One of the things that I really like is how you've put the learning, or you buried that within the building and really put that really close to the residents. Something that I hadn't thought about for a long time until you talk to people who are in need is that, you're going to be behind in the technological gap, right? And just being able to have, support, not library books, but library technology, learning how, to set up an email address again, learning how to use a phone again, or maybe for the first time sometimes, are these become basics of necessities of modern life. And that the homeless, they lose those skills because they don't have them, they don't have those kinds of devices with them all the time. So I like that how you've tastefully buried some of those necessary functions in the project, but also enjoying the fact that having a discrete place, but of course highlighting health being on the first floor, other people could take advantage of the health suite. There's just really careful placement that you've done that I just want to commend you on.
Thank you.
A very complete presentation, and the video is very nice as well. And I appreciate very much the way in which the building sort of deals with this row house fabric. in that neighborhood, and albeit, you know, they're larger than the row houses, but I think there's a sort of sensitivity to it that is nice, you know. I have two questions though, fundamentally. One is there a separate accommodation in the building for people with mental health problems in terms of where they stay? You know, first of all. And the second question is, can you talk a little bit about the passive security on each of the floors in terms of, is there a central place where someone can stand and see everything that's going on, you know, by simply turning because even though this has characteristics of an apartment building and things, lots of times you're dealing with people with troubled lives and troubled histories and troubled behavior, and you do have to staff it a certain way to make sure that everybody's safe. So is there a consideration for that?
Sorry, your first point was the mental health, correct?
Yeah, are
Yes.
there separate locations
Yep.
for mental health?
Not necessarily. There is like the healthcare wing, and the program that I used came very strongly from the program, the new updated buildings that DC has provided. And so that's where my program reflected off of. So, and at the same time, I would argue that this is transitional housing and it takes a couple steps to get to this point. You're not coming in straight off of the street. There's other things you need to be qualified
So
for.
those folks might be someplace else.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. All right. So security question.
Yes. So there is the main entrance to the building where, right here, the lobby where you would get checked in. As of going up onto the upper floors, there's not like a direct place where you would need to check in or check out, which I think is a very good idea moving forward. But
you don't have a security station on each floor or anything like that?
I do not.
This cohort population wouldn't require that, in your opinion?
From the research that I've
Yeah.
done, it's very apparent that you need to have like individual spaces and secured storage spaces. And I feel like if I was going to take a second stab at this, maybe looking into that and doing a little bit more research about it to see if that would be needed. But like I said, taking my program from the previous examples in DC,
They haven't had
they did not
Okay,
have that.
fair enough,
Yep.
fair enough. Well, I mean, I think simple security is, buildings should have easy ways that, you know, you go around corners and hallways you can't see down and things, even if it's not for a population that has potentially, you know, troubled histories and things. It's always a good thing to consider.
Thanks, Megan. You give us a great presentation, and you inspired me to ask a couple of questions. First of all, you talked about the desire of unhoused people to fit in or feel like they fit in, or the stigma. I think that neighborhoods tend to be averse to housing for unhoused populations in the neighborhood because they feel that it's not appropriate in their neighborhood, a kind of NIMBY attitude. You also talked about your interest in making the transition between the low scale of the row houses and the tall mixed use. And so I'm just wondering if there's a kind of synergistic opportunity here to make the ground floor retail. So let me just spin this for a sec. It would be revenue generating. From the statistics you gave, I think it would take something like 50 of these buildings to actually house all of the unhoused individuals. So, you know, something that I don't think DC is going to be able to afford. So if you use that paradigm of the kind of typical mixed use apartment building, you would have something revenue generating. It would look like other buildings. So instead of having the kind of social services on the ground, which, you know, says to me kind of public, you know, housing of some sort, it would look like other buildings. And third, it would potentially offer a way for the residents to have jobs. So, you know, rather than just learning how to cook in a kitchen upstairs, they might have a chance to work in a restaurant. You know, if you put the laundromat down there, they might get jobs in the laundromat, that kind of thing. So it might be a better sort of transition for the residents. And also, a kind of a tighter fit for the community, something that looks like what people are used to. So that was the main thought. The next thought that came to me was I just had the great privilege of spending time in Japan, where I lived in a tiny, tiny apartment, a studio apartment that was about 150 square feet, that had everything. It had an induction stove, it had a washer dryer, it had everything you need, but it was really tiny. And so again, if you have to build 50 of these buildings, I think that you might make your spaces smaller. You know, if it's transitional, then hopefully people can go on to a more commodious apartment. Yeah, but anyway, thanks for tackling the
Thank you.
project, and I'll pass it on to our esteemed critics.
Great presentation. I'm really impressed. I think the main thing, the word, if I had to sum it up, would be empathy. I think you've really done your homework. You've talked to people, you've researched, other successful projects, and you've come up with a really beautiful design. The outdoor terraces aren't really realistic, like the walls aren't high enough. But, you're an architect, you'll get there. I wanted to just put something out there. You didn't talk a whole lot about visitors, but a lot of these men, they do have families, they have kids. So, thinking about that, like that gathering place, it's not just going to be for the residents, it's going to be for their families, their friends, and even for their kids. And maybe there's somewhere for, kids to play, or yeah, just something that where it feels like there's something specifically for them. That's it.
I just wanted to congratulate you for a good job.
Thank you.
I like the way that you broke the scale of the building, the way that you merged it between the commercial and the residential, and how you broke the building itself so that it could relate to both scales. I like the way that it addresses the entrance, that people know where to go, what's happening there. And actually, I think that Maddie's idea of creating commercial on that first floor would be a very good idea. It hadn't occurred to me either, but it's very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually just wanted to point out that we had conversations about making that first floor more of a public realm where the residents could come down and work, essentially, like a cafe and things like that. The ideas never really got fully fleshed out, and it proved to be kind of difficult with how is the space actually functional with like outdoor goods coming into the building, and then there's that security reason. So I definitely agree. I think that'd be a great second layer to the project. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to ask, who actually owns this lot?
It's vacant.
I know it's
I have no,
vacant. I
I'm
drive through
assuming,
there all the
I'm
time.
assuming it,
Okay, so
someone in
you-
DC, I'm not sure who owns it. The
So
last
it's
time I checked, it
Not
was
DC government, it's privately owned then,
It-
probably.
probably.
Okay. And is there shelter for this ward already now? Do you know?
Yes.
Where is that one?
Off the top of my head, you got me. But
Okay, no, it's not
but
a
there
trick
is a
question.
new shelter in every ward of DC.
Yeah, no, I know that.
So,
I was just wondering, where is it in this ward?
I'm
if-
not
if it
positively at
exists.
the moment. I'm sorry.
And if it doesn't exist, you should show this to them. Now, so that's one thing. The other is, it's great that you're changing from the row house scale. I think you could go even higher, up to 7 to 8 stories, so that the building sort of, when you look at your top elevation up there, that the massing of your building could have gone up just to get more density, because it's, you need this type of project. So then my last thing is ask you, since you've looked at the other shelters, what have you done that sort of elevates doing shelters like this?
So the other shelters don't have a lot of classroom space or study space.
Mhm.
There are common rooms,
Yeah.
but not as expansive as I have made them with the double height libraries, adding the gym and the garden space.
Okay.
There's a few examples in DC of the new buildings that do have an outdoor courtyard of some sort.
Yeah.
that have like a play area for children,
Yeah.
which makes sense for families.
Yeah, for the family
Yes,
shelters.
but mine really pushes a little bit deeper into those learning aspects.
Yeah.
Yep.
What I do know about them, although we haven't worked on one, but I think they make the people who live here leave every day to go to search for jobs and come back so that they're not hanging out. But that's just Monday through, I guess, Friday or whatever. And the other thing, just to point out, Bread for the City is like halfway up the block from you. And it's sort of interesting that if you could really get this site, and it's near, do you know what Bread for the City is? It's a social services, sorry, where they have some of the things you talked about, job training, there are lawyers to help them with stuff, dental, other sort of medical stuff. We did the one in Anacostia, and I call it, it's like one-stop shopping for social services. And so it's just so funny that you picked this site that's really nearby, that there's a synergy between what you're doing and what's literally mid-block. So.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, first of all, congratulations. I thought your presentation was beautiful and the video was really, really nice. The building itself, seeing a section, seeing an attitude on construction and the CLT construction and all that, but I'm really excited to see the premise of your thesis and to create a transitional housing that actually gives dignity to folks. And I said I have something to add to that because we do shelters and affordable housing, and we actually built a building right near Shaw, right there at Rhode Island in 7th, right on top of that. So you're 2 blocks away from a building that's affordable housing from folks that come from this kind of building. And it's very interesting because it's the next step over. Where
It's perfect.
it is. So I kind of thought, wow, isn't this ironic? It's kind of cool to see that here. The building, the part of the dignity that I saw was and the word was used earlier, your empathy in designing the spaces for these folks. I thought they were beautiful. They're luxurious, actually. But aspiring to that, I think it's wonderful. And imagine if such a reality would actually exist and someone could actually have the possibility to be in one of those rooms that you designed, that sense that you can aspire to more. And if this building has all these programs that can actually help elevate folks, it is a very interesting and almost real thesis in that sense. So I could keep going on, but I'm going to let others speak. So thanks.
I don't have a great deal to say, Megan. Look, it's a serious project. It's a serious problem. It's one which politicians aren't particularly interested in because the homeless are largely not registered voters for all the obvious reasons about, contact details and so on. No, I appreciate there are ways around it.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that we are interested in because there are all these.
No, I'm talking about politicians.
Well, they're interested too.
Oh, well, you
Yeah, not universal across this country. No, I'm saying DC, and which is where
DC they are, yeah.
it's a big deal. We're quite limited. For now. Go ahead.
The intelligent thing about handling the circulation is that you didn't reduce it to a series of corridors, which virtually all your colleagues have done, by the way. And you saw it as a series of opportunities for people to congregate and gather and do different things in. And it's refreshing and an intelligent view of things. I do think you probably need to make some analysis of why there remain issues in shelters. I thought it was very interesting what you were saying about Milton not wanting to go to the shelter because frankly he felt safer on the street. I mean, this is an incredible indictment of the way that shelters operate, that actually it worsens the situation for people who are homeless. I think just some kind of examination of why that was the case and how you would mitigate that problem within your building would have been useful. And the final thing is, in the days when British politicians had social policy, which they don't anymore because they're more interested in supplying bullets to dubious regimes. I won't go into that, or say who they are. But the interesting thing is that we used to have things called Rowton houses. These were Edwardian buildings which stretched the length and breadth of the country. George Orwell actually talks about them. And they were noble buildings. There's one 10 minutes walk from where I live, one of the very few left. You know, they've been demolished now to put up holiday inns. But they were made of bulletproof materials internally and externally. And they had a kind of majestic presence in the urban fabric. I have no problem with any of the CLT and all the rest of it. I do feel there's work that needs to be done about the streetscape and how one would see this building. It has a slightly Lego-y appearance to it. It may just be the video, but I think looking at a noble, permanent, durable material that complements the use of the structural timber externally would be an interesting move. It just needs that thing where this is a prototype for something that could crop up all over the country. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to repeat a lot of what other people have said, but the one thing that I really appreciated was that not only did you fit the program into the building, but you used the elements of the program to create spaces within the building, and you thought sectionally. And that's, I mean, that's one of the big steps in becoming an architect, is not only think about, you know, how big it is and does it fit there, but you know, how these spaces are modulating and how they're connecting and they're overlapping. I think that shows a level of sophistication in design that, you know, I certainly appreciate. I'm very happy to see it. And I think that the way you use the model to show us all of the faces of the building showed us that you weren't just thinking about one view and what that building would look like from one vantage point. I think that also shows a lot of development. And it's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you for the variety of drawing types. Being able to see the entire street view and how your building fits in really sort of emphasizes that diagram that you showed on how you studied the pattern and the rhythms and the heights and the sizes. And, you know, looking at the plan and the program, there was obvious thought around the functionality of spaces and where you place them. The idea that dining and kitchen is off of a back alley for service, you know, that's exactly where all of us would first look. You know, so bravo to taking it to that level of detail that allows us to make, you know, comments and critiques, you know, being able to comment on the material of your building. I will just second that in order sometimes for these buildings to have the longevity, the material choice and the maintainability of that is key, so that money isn't having to go into maintenance, it can go into the occupants. And so that is one thing to really think about. And the last thing I'll just say is if you go on DC zoning map online, it tells you who the owner of this property is. And I strongly recommend, perhaps with some of your faculty's assistants, that you take this to them or find a developer who might, you know, be willing to integrate, because I think it's a great concept. DC needs models that can be replicated and be able to fit in well, function, have the security, have the discretion into our city fabric. And so I strongly encourage, if you can, to take this after today to the developer, to the landowner, to put it in their mind what they could potentially do here.
Or bring it back to the city too. I mean, the city is looking at this and bringing it back to the city and saying, look, you know, I've been looking at this based upon your previous work with family housing, that this is a way to deal with a really serious problem of single males, you know, that are basically on the streets. They're everywhere in the city, and we can't ignore it. So, are we running out of steam? Do we have any more accolades to say? Or should we pass okay, we have biting criticism right here. Hold on.
Criticism. Maybe the next step, find out who the owner is, and they can team with the developer to make an unsolicited proposal to the city to develop this. And then the developer could sell the product to the, sorry, call it product, too much developer time, but you can sell it, literally sell it to the city, and then they can own and operate it. So there are ways to do that. So find out who owns it.
If there are no more comments from the reviewers, could we pass over to the chair of the committee?
Thank you.
Professor Burke.
All right. Well, Megan, you did it. Amazing work. Thank you for this semester. It was a pleasure working with Megan. She from day one she came in and she told me, I want to work on this. This is an issue that interests me, that that I'm intrigued about. And she was laser focused. And some of the comments that you made, some of the adjectives you used, such as empathy and dignified, I think that was at the heart of her intentions. And it just, you know, she thought about every time I asked her about something, she would have an answer. One of the most diligent students that I've worked with. So, you know, the only thing I can say beyond the comments, very rich comments that you've received, which are very useful as well. Some of the issues that were raised, such as the revenue generating strategies, we talked about that. We had a lot of conversations, and obviously not all of the ideas got included in the proposal. Some of them remain to be slightly further investigated, and I think it's a great idea if you could in the future present it to the city. That would be fantastic. So the only thing I would have to say is congratulations. It was a pleasure working with you this semester.
Congratulations, Megan, and congratulations to all of the folks that presented today. I want to thank our reviewers, some of whom will be back with us tomorrow. We may have some new reviewers tomorrow as well. And so thank you all very much. We start tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. So the first presentation at 11 should take place here. This is instruction for the students for tomorrow. The second one here. The subsequent ones loaded on the backside so that we can get going. Thank you all.